Happy St. Patrick's Day. When people speak about St. Patrick's Day, the first thing that comes to my mind is drinking beer. But I'm a wine drinker myself, so I thought, I wonder if there's been a study or a map done about, beer versus wine. And of course, I found it. Somebody actually showed me this map, and they asked me, I wonder who built this map, and how they find the data, and how that makes this map very interesting. What are some of the insights that they had? And guess what? I found a person. Welcome back, everybody. And now I have the creator of the map that I found from BR1. That's just everybody say hi to Joe Nelson.
Hello, YouTubers, internet. Hi, Alice. Thanks.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. So I thought it's better to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the creator of this map, to explain to us, first of all, why did you create this map? This is a very interesting map between the comparison of beer versus wine, but what makes you do this in the first place?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can map the same data, and there's no one right way to tell that story.
Okay.
And so when a map nerd sits down and looks at their data and they're thinking, gosh, what are the interesting things about this? They might end up actually making quite a few different maps. And each one gives you a different perspective of the same phenomenon, which is kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that we're never done. We can always go back and change things and make a different map or a new map.
Yes.
And I stumbled on some really interesting data about the amount of spending that the average person does per county in the United States on beer and on wine. And so I thought, gosh, it'd be kind of cool to do like a beer versus wine face-off and make a map to show where are they spending a bunch on wine, where are they spending a bunch on beer, where are they just spending a bunch on booze in general. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun to make a map that showed you the preference and then just the overall interest in spending on that sort of thing. And beer and wine is fun. But this sort of data exists for everything, right? Like refrigerators and washing machines, or who watches college basketball versus professional basketball.
Right.
All sorts of interesting. Who's voting Democrat versus Republican, of course, right? Everybody is used to seeing maps like that. But I thought beer versus wine was a more fun way to illustrate those points.
Sounds good. Is there something you can show us?
Yeah.
Like, I think the one I saw that it was really cool was the first map was it was just like a bunch of orange, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then it was just like a tiny little bit of purples. Can you explain a little bit about that map?
Yeah, beery orange and winey purples. So I actually made a story map. I ended up, like I said, making a bunch of different maps as I explored the data, as people do. And I thought, gosh, these maps kind of tell a story about why it's important to show data in this way. So I dropped these maps into a story map.
And story map, for those who don't know what that is just a really rich blog type web page that you can build with the GIS technology to help you illustrate videos and pictures, and as well as text.
Are you seeing my screen now? It's
I am.
Some booze on my screen. Okay,
I
so
do.
A glass of beer and a little glass of wine. And I introduced the idea, and I said, I'm going to be showing you data about spending per person on beer versus spending per person on wine. And the first thing I did when I was looking at this data is I thought, well, who's spending more on beer or who's spending more on wine at the county level? And it was pretty interesting. So the vast majority of the number of counties in the United States actually spends more money buying beer than they do spending it on wine. But I noticed there was kind of a correlation between urban areas where a lot of people live and the preference for wine. So that was kind of interesting. Put a pin in that, and we can talk about that in a sec. So here they are isolated. And I said, not just spends more on beer or spends more on, not just like an even split, but like, show me statistically who's spending way more on beer or way more on wine. Where is the preference really extreme, one versus the other?
Right.
And there was a really interesting national pattern that started to pop up. You get these urban centers along the coast with a high population density. It's city folks who are buying much more wine than they are beer. And then look at just down middle America, right? These rural and farming agricultural communities tend to spend almost nothing on wine compared to what they're spending on beer. And that's interesting too. So there are social patterns that sort of emerge in stuff as specific as beer versus wine spending preference, you know?
I wonder if it has anything to do with the perception of where beer versus wine.
On the perception of where it's even made, certainly, or grown. So beer
Right.
is a grain product, and this is where it's grown. So this
So
is your
right.
homegrown
But
drink, right?
yeah, maybe people have their own, you know, little brewery, you know, somewhere,
Yeah,
or their friends have their own brewery, just make their own beer. I
yeah,
wonder.
absolutely. I live in Michigan, right here in Michigan,
Yeah.
and a new kind of cool thing that's happened in the last 10 and 20 years is just the emergence of every community has their own brewery pretty much, and it's so
That's
fun
interesting.
to go to a community and kind of get the feel for that community in that
Yeah.
sense. And here you are in California, where
Yeah.
obviously a lot of the vineyards are that
Right.
produce wines exist, and they're loyal to their local product, right? People are buying locally, and that's interesting.
Hmm. And what
Except
do
for
you think?
Denver, I don't think a lot of
Oh, Denver.
wine is grown in
No,
Denver.
but
They sure love it.
why do you think? I mean, why do you think this? You know, people should care about this. Why do you think this is interesting?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to tell a story, and if I'm making a map comparing beer versus wine, that's fun, but there are also pretty serious data sets that can be presented in the same way. So for example, like I said, political maps, Republican voting versus Democrat voting. Those are all very serious. And I mean, if you're in the marketing and retail industry, beer versus wine is also serious. You want to know
Yes.
where you should be sending your stock, you know, where you could locate distribution hubs, that sort of thing. So beer and wine is a little bit of a proxy for all sorts of things, right?
It's
Where
interesting.
are elderly populations versus young populations? Where should I position my medical facilities if I'm a national healthcare provider, something like that?
Right. This definitely can go into different areas. I see. And I think nothing, they always say that, you know, a picture worth 1,000 words. All this data you've done can easily be done by a spreadsheet or Word document or a blog, right? But
Yeah, and that's how
presented
it,
this way, it's so much easier to see and visualize.
yeah, for sure. And that's how I got it. I got it as an Excel table. An Excel
Right.
table with some spending data for each county for beer and for wine. And once you just smush it into a map, you're like, oh, okay. And you see patterns that you never would see a geographic pattern, of course, in an Excel spreadsheet until you put it into the context of a map and you say, oh, this is actually pretty interesting. It's not totally random what's going
Right.
on here. And then you can start asking better questions. Maps help
Right.
you ask questions you didn't think to ask in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Does it take us to the next level, really, to think
Hmm.
further? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I looked at beer and wine spending per capita, and then I thought, here's the overall spending. So this picture just shows us preference.
Yep.
Where do they prefer wine? Where do they prefer beer? But a lot of these counties might not be spending very much on beer or wine overall. And there is a preference, sure, but it's kind of a trivial thing. Whereas some places may or may not have a preference, but they're spending a lot of money proportionally on alcohol, which is interesting. And so I made a map that just says, here's where people are spending more or less on alcohol, beer and wine, alcohol anyway. And you
Mm.
get this kind of brightness in areas where they
Yep.
spend proportionally much more per person, and areas where they're spending less per person on beer and wine.
Yeah, like that dark square in the middle, or middle above.
Yeah, interesting.
Mm.
And there's all kinds of rabbit holes that we could dive into and ask ourselves, what are we seeing here? Why? Is that
Right.
correlated to something else? What are the
Right.
historic causes? Are there cultural enclaves that are in that location that could be driving? All kinds of cool stuff, right?
Yeah,
Maps are amazing.
I think that's what GIS maps is amazing to me, is the correlation that you can draw from this. Like one simple map can really takes you to another thought pattern for something else, because everything is really related, right?
Yeah, everything's related to everything else, and nearby things are more closely related. That's
Yes.
yeah, you just said the first law of geography. That's the
Everything
first law.
somewhere.
Yeah, everything's related to everything, but close things are more closely related.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Anything
so
else? Yep.
yeah, sure. So I took those two maps and I smushed them together,
Okay.
and I made a map where it shows the preference of beer versus wine on average. So um, these places are spending more than the average on a wine versus beer preference. But then I dimmed it by where they're not spending much overall. So this gives you a more nuanced picture, a map that shows you preference and overall spending. So two things in one map, right? Double
That's
your money.
great.
So if this is what 1,000 words, this map is now 2,000 words, and they're really nuanced words.
Yes.
So there's that sort of map. And look how I just kind of capped it off with that lovely
Oh,
little
I love how you
picture
match the
of
winery
the
and the
wheat.
the wheat.
Isn't
That's
that
nice.
adorable?
It's very beautiful. You should be a graphic designer.
I should.
Yeah, by
Um,
night. Yeah.
oh yeah, by night. And so I was looking at this data, and like I said, there's just a million ways that you can visualize this sort of thing. So using the exact same data,
Yeah.
I made something called a Chernoff map. And Chernoff maps are just bananas. They're crazy. So a Chernoff map encodes data using cartoon faces. So
Love that idea.
every aspect of like a face corresponds to some part of the data. So the way the
Emojis are the best.
yeah, they're emojis. So the way the emoji guy looks, like if he likes beer, he's bald and has
With
a
a
big
beard.
bushy beard. If he likes wine, he's got like the combed hair and the sort of French mustache. And if they actually buy a lot of it, they appear more drunk and bigger, right? Their eyes are kind of like woo.
Right.
And if they just aren't buying very much in that area at all, they look very serious and very sober, right?
Oh, okay.
So right away, you're communicating what's actually a lot of data, but you're doing it by cartoon faces.
I
And
love it.
people like cartoon faces. I grew up
Yeah.
watching Scooby-Doo, of course. I'm primed to like
And
Chernoff
you're
maps.
just able to locate emotions on a map.
Yeah,
You
and
just tie that in.
you tied in, and even here you can see the trend, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing more of the wine dude, and he's bigger and he's drunker in these areas than he is in other places. And you go to Middle America, and the beer guy gets huge, and
Yeah.
he's kind of drunk too.
Yeah.
There are some places where they prefer beer, but they're just not spending very much on alcohol at all,
Right.
like Utah,
Right.
right?
But this could be
And
for anything.
could
This
be
could
for
be
anything,
for
yeah.
any cultural issues, any, any debate between anything. Because you have this correlated on a map like this, I can ask even more deeper questions, whereas I
Yeah.
couldn't before by looking at spreadsheets.
Yeah, it's true. And there are pros and cons to different methods. Like, for example, if I was doing a serious topic, I
Yeah.
wouldn't do a Chernoff map with cartoon faces.
Right.
I think Chernoff is kind of appropriate for a topic like this because it's fun and it's engaging.
Yes.
And it will reach an audience that my just plain color coded map would never reach, right? Something like this might land in Reddit and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it and
Right.
pointing things out and looking for patterns. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
But a Chernoff map is a pretty specific technique and maybe a little bit silly and not totally the best in all cases. But if you
Right.
want to engage a population that's like a non-specialist, non-scientific folks, because it's interesting and it's fun, it'll grab their attention in a way that another map wouldn't. So
Right.
always consider the theme, consider the topic,
Mhm.
and make a map that fits that. And don't be afraid to make a bunch of different maps showing the same data because each one reveals something a little bit different.
This is so great. So my last question usually for my guests is there, since our big topic of GIS is everything is somewhere, is there anything that you can think of that you cannot put a location to?
Oh, good question. Boy, you got me stumped.
So for
Ella, that's a good
example,
one.
I asked the same question to my daughter and she go, oh, what about a color blue? I'm like, well, the sky is blue. Can we map the sky?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can. We can map the universe. This mug is blue. Can we map this mug? Of course, because blue is an adjective that describes a noun. So we can always map that noun.
Yeah,
So,
because it's a thing
It's a thing that you're
associated with the thing.
describing.
And if it's a thing, it's going to exist somewhere. I
Somewhere,
mean,
right?
this morning I was playing with a satellite image of the whole world,
Yeah.
and I was separating out the red, blue, and green ink from the world because I wanted to boost different characteristics of it. Maybe I wanted the ocean's depth to appear brighter and more saturated.
There you go.
And so I separated out those color bands, and then I said, hey, blue, I'm going to dial you up to 120%. And then I sandwiched those color bands back together, and I got a more vibrant looking ocean in my world map image. So yeah, I mean, I was just mapping the color blue this morning.
There you go. That just answered my question. I think that's something it's something you can think about. If you can think of something, and that's for the audience as well, if you can think of something that you cannot tie a location to it, please send me a comment on this video or send me a LinkedIn message.
Stump Alice.
I'll stump Alice,
her.
because I can't think of anything that I cannot map. I literally can't.
There's a lot of map ideas. And my son, I mean, I'm looking in my monitor right now and I see this list of things. My son Juno, who's 11, came in and said, I've got this idea for a map. And he just started writing all these ideas down. Dinosaur population, a cave map, animal size maps, map of drugs, health map, where's it hotter versus colder, a sports map, a school map, cold and warm-blooded animal habitat maps. This is, how cool is that, right? He's just thinking, I've got all these questions and I'm a curious kid. I think maps can help me figure it out. And he just wailed away at this list. Right,
like even anything that you don't think has a location will describe a location. There's always a location tied to it. Doesn't matter. You can say, oh, what about my beliefs? Somebody can say, oh, what if my religion? Well, where do you practice your religion? Sure. Or where do you spread your religion? Where did you get this belief from? Where's that book that you read from? All those things, right? Tied to a location or tied to an author, that ties to a location, ties to a human.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
there's no end to it. So that's
there's no end to the number of maps that need to be made. Alice, you just overwhelmed me. Now I gotta go. I've got some work to do. I've got to make maps.
Thank you. Well, thanks, John, for joining us today on this episode of Ask Alice Anything on beer and wine and GIS.
For sure. And, beer, wine, GIS.
Ask you any questions about this map, or they can just simply comment on this particular video.
Yeah, of course. And I have a YouTube channel myself. Did you know that?
Oh, no, I didn't. Please include it, and I'll put that in our description, Pat, and then I will include that in this video, and we'll hopefully see, you might see a spike. This might go viral. You never know.
It probably will, Alice. YouTube high five.
YouTube high five. There we go. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a great day. Happy mapping.